listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the fifth Doctor story, The Five Doctors, or the fifth. It falls on a fifth Doctor season, but it's got more than one Doctor. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Father Corey couldn't be with us today, but he'll be back with us soon, I hope. Be sure to stick around to the end of the episode. We have more of your listener feedback, and I want to tell you to like The Secrets of Doctor Who on our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Secrets of Doctor Who. Retweet us on Twitter, where we're at SQPN, and leave us comments wherever you find us on social media. We love to hear from you. And I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy called The Secrets of Star Wars. That's a fine podcast where we talk everything about Star Wars, and you can find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Star Wars. But this time we're talking about The Five Doctors, which was the 20th anniversary special of Doctor Who. And as we're approaching the 60th anniversary, that seems an appropriate time to talk about it. And Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens in this one?
This week, a mysterious Time Lord figure is using a device called the Time Scoop to scoop the first 5 incarnations of the Doctor out of their times and drop them into a place called the Death Zone. Only Tom Baker didn't sign up for this adventure, so his incarnation gets stuck in transit. The Time Scoop is also being used to scoop up various companions from the past and deliver them to the Death Zone. The Death Zone is located on Gallifrey, and before the time of Rassilon, the Time Lord's ancestors would use the Time Scoop to bring warriors from different races to the Death Zone and watch them play the game of Rassilon, or fight each other. But Rassilon put an end to that practice, and his tomb is located in the middle of the Death Zone in a dark tower. The Doctors and various companions end up heading for the tower, but on the way they must get past challenges from famous villains like Daleks, Cybermen, and Yeti. The High Council of the Time Lords also brings the Master in and asks him to rescue the Doctor and to let them know who's misusing the Death Zone. There's lots of wandering about and time wasting, but nothing much that advances the plot. Eventually, it's revealed that the mysterious Time Lord figure who snatched the Doctors and their companions out of time and put them in the Death Zone is the Lord President of the Council, Barusa, and he wants to get immortality from Rassilon and rule the Time Lords forever. Rassilon, who is kinda sorta dead and not dead, lets him have his ring of immortality, but it makes him immortal by turning him into a piece of architecture, and he becomes a bas-relief on the side of Rassilon's tomb. Rassilon then sends all but the fifth Doctor back to their own times. Now that Barusa is gone, the Time Lords have appointed the fifth Doctor as Lord President, but he takes his companions and goes on the run instead. After all, that's the way it all began. The end.
All right. Jimmy, what was your overall impression of this one?
It's there. I've never been a big fan of this one. And I think that it's not that it's bad. It's not bad. It's just very bland and paint by numbers. It's a 90-minute episode, making it the longest single piece of Doctor Who ever. And in order to fill that time, there's just lots of paint by numbers stuff. You have all of the 5 Doctors introduced. You have the companions introduced. You got a little bit of inter-Doctor squabbling. They all end up heading towards the Dark Tower by different routes. They all face challenges to waste time on their way to the Dark Tower, and then we have the revelation at the end. It's very, very paint by numbers. It's not particularly creative. It's very predictable. And so to me, it's very bland as a story.
Is it longer than the 8th Doctor TV movie?
Yes, it's like 3 minutes longer.
Oh, okay. So, but yeah, it was long. So for me, I felt it would have been vastly improved with the addition of Tom Baker. Mm-hmm. I think he would have added something to this.
He might have dominated it. He might have added too much.
That's true. I did like that each Doctor got something to do, that they weren't just like with the 3 Doctors. I think it was it William Hartnell kind of an image on the screen.
He was the Tom Baker of the 3 Doctors. He was the one that got stuck in transit.
And that they got paired with different companions that wasn't their normal companion. That was kind of fun.
Big Finish has done a lot like that.
Yeah. And, when I'm comparing the multi-doctor stories of classic Who, I'll set the modern Who ones aside for a second. I think it's better than the 3 Doctors, but I kind of like the 2 Doctors a little better.
Really?
I don't know. I felt I really like you do. I really like the 2nd Doctor, and you got a lot more to do in that one. And it was an interesting location. Spain, they went to Spain. So, but these multi-doctor stories of classic Who, they don't seem to be all that great. They don't seem to do a good job of them.
They're not. I actually would prefer the 3 Doctors to this one. But I think that where multi-doctor stories, the first really good multi-doctor story is Time Crash. It's like the 5-minute one featuring the 5th and the 10th Doctors that Stephen Moffat wrote. That Time Crash is awesome. Time Crash is, to my money, the best multi-doctor story out there. I think that one of the things that this one does, because I know at like the 50th anniversary, people were unhappy that, but it's just the modern era Doctors. We want to see all of them. And I'm going, no, you don't. Because if you've got to cram 11 Doctors into a story, they're all going to end up with very little to do. And you just can't have casts of main characters that are that big. You can't have 11 co-leads. And so I was fine with them just focusing on 3 Doctors. So, I think this is, even though they're only trying to manage 5 and it's really 4, it's already at the breaking point.
Yeah.
And it becomes very formulaic because you got to give them all something to do. So here come all the tick boxes. Here's the 1st Doctor's thing to do. Here's the 2nd Doctor's thing to do. Here's the challenge the 1st Doctor faces. Here's the challenge the 2nd Doctor faces, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the modern Who multi-doctor stories, Time Crash you mentioned, The Day of the Doctor, you have 3, Twice Upon a Time, you have 2, which I really liked that one. I thought, I had his name for a second, but the doctor who plays the 1st Doctor, the actor plays first, did a really good job. I thought that was a good story. And then it's interesting that for the 60th anniversary, they're not doing a multi-doctor as far as we know.
Well, they haven't told us, but there are some hints, maybe.
Right. And depending on when that comes out, we're not quite sure when it's going to air. So this recording may actually be released after that, so then we'll know. But it's very interesting that so far all we know is they're bringing back David Tennant, and we may actually see some of the other Doctors probably from Modern Who.
We will see the 15th, so Ncuti Gatwa is going to be in it. So it will at least be a multi-doctor story in part. Hypothetically, that could just be at the end of the 3rd special, though.
Right.
We don't know if it'll be broader than that.
Right. So this one, the 20th anniversary special, it was aired as part of a promotion for the Children in Need charity broadcast, which was the first time that was done. Although in Modern Who, that's been done. The Doctor Who has been supporting that a lot more. I think Russell T Davies kind of took that inspiration and was doing that. So that was a nice part of that. In fact, this aired much after the end of this season. I think it was trying to think of when exactly this special, the end of season 20. It was like November.
That is so 1983.
Right. Yeah, it was March. It ended in March of the 20th season ended in March of 83. But the November was, at the time of the anniversary was when the 5 Doctors came out. So as I mentioned that William Hartnell was not, had died. He had died by this point in 1983. So they replaced him with the actor Richard Herndl, who I think did a creditable job.
Yeah, I liked him. He did a good job as a 1st Doctor.
Yeah. I thought that was very interesting. What did you think of, do you know why Tom Baker didn't come back, having been the most recent Doctor?
I think there are different ways of looking at it, but he was pretty standoffish for a while, and different actors have different preferences. Like Christopher Eccleston has said he's okay with coming back, but he wants it to be a 9th Doctor story. He doesn't want to do just a bit part in a multi-doctor story. And Tom Baker may have felt the same way. He hadn't been off of the show for that long, and he may have been a little big for his britches. In fact, Tom Baker can be a little big for his britches, as is commonly acknowledged. And so that may have played a role as well. Also, another character, I know why she didn't reappear, Lalla Ward, who played Romana 2, is in this via the footage they reused to get Tom Baker in it. They took footage from the incompleted story Shada, which nobody had seen anything of at the time. Shada was originally in production, but then a strike prevented them from completing the series. And so it was unaired for a long time. Recently, there have been various adaptations of it, including an animated one. But at the time, nobody had seen anything from Shada, so this was brand new footage, and they just used some footage of Tom Baker and Lalla Ward punting at Oxford as kind of their setup scene, and then when the time scoop scoops them, they get stuck in transit. And that's the last we see of them. But I know that Lalla Ward was also asked, and she said, no, I don't want to work with Tom Baker again. No doubt partly because they had been married and divorced. They married after the show, and then after a year or two, they got divorced.
Interesting. Yeah, we actually talked about Shada, the animated, the partially animated reconstruction back in 2018, January 2018. So almost 6 years ago, as we're recording this now. That was our episode 59. If you want to go check that out.
Yeah. Also, just to make another point of comparison with Christopher Eccleston's refusal to appear in the 50th anniversary, he felt that his disappearance actually made the 50th anniversary better, because that gave us the War Doctor, which added a huge, because originally the War Doctor was going to be the Ninth Doctor. And then when Christopher Eccleston, and the presumption would have been he was the one who fought through the Time War. But then when Christopher Eccleston said he wasn't going to come back, Stephen Moffat created the War Doctor with John Hurt, and it added this new mystery dimension to the Doctor, which was interesting. And in the same way, I think Tom Baker's failure to appear in this one it actually benefits it. Because if he had appeared, we would have had an extra Doctor to cram into the story and give a bunch of things to do, including another challenge that has to be found on the way to the Dark Tower and stuff like that. And Tom Baker, as entertaining as he is to watch, he chews the scenery. And that would have either dominated the presence of the other Doctors, or they would have had to adopt extreme scenery chewing in order to compete with Tom Baker.
Right. I wonder who the villain he would have had to face would be, because we had the second Doctor has to face a Yeti, the third Doctor faces a weird robot. We'll get to that, and the Cybermen. The first Doctor faces the Daleks. I'm kind of curious who they would have had him have to go up against.
Could have been the Weirin, could have been all kinds of people.
Yeah,
because he was there for 7 years. He faced a lot of villains.
That's true. So you mentioned Romana's other companions that did appear. We saw Romana 2 in this one. We have Carol Ann Ford as an adult Susan.
Yay! She was awesome.
Yep, and she was really good. Fraser Hines, who's Jamie, and Wendy Padbury, who's Zoe, show up as illusions.
Yep.
As do Carol and John, Liz Shaw, and Richard Franklin, Mike Yates. So we don't get them as their actual companions, which, is a little disappointing, but they do show up for moments.
Yeah. And it would have been really hard to work them in as actual companions. Otherwise, you'd have more companions running around than Doctors, which we actually already kind of have anyway.
Right. Because we also have Nicholas Courtney as the Brigadier, Lethbridge Stewart, was awesome. Elizabeth Sladen, Sarah Jane. And we get a brief cameo of K9 Mark III, who existed at this time period in 1983 because they had been trying to make a K9 and Sarah Jane pilot, I think.
K9 and Company.
Right. Which is kind of funny that they eventually did make a Sarah Jane spinoff show much later. Very interesting. They do start the episode with a clip of William Hartnell, the first Doctor, with his famous "One day I shall come back" line.
Where he's talking to Susan. And they still need to pay that off. They need to, I mean, come on, 15th Doctor, go back to 22nd century Earth and have Susan.
That would be interesting. Ncuti Gatwa showing up. Hey, I'm your grandfather. I mean, although for Time Lords, I guess such radical changes in appearance would not be that big a deal. I guess.
She'd roll with it. And Big Finish actually has filled out Susan's story with the 8th Doctor coming back to and has had a bunch of adventures with Susan, played by Carol Ann Ford. But they still need to do it on TV too. Yeah.
We had the 12th Doctor with her picture on his desk and never paid that off. That was disappointing.
Yeah.
The 5th Doctor has a shiny new TARDIS console that he's got set up on board. I'm trying to figure out why maybe they're updating the TARDIS. I mean, that's one of the things they do for the new season, whatever. But it becomes part of the plot because he's got to make it work. And Turlough and Tegan are his companions, but Turlough kind of disappears for most of this one. He's in it for a very brief period of time at the beginning.
Yeah.
And most of it, he's gone. He's not there at all. But Tegan gets a lot of play.
Yeah, most of it he's in the TARDIS, whereas Tegan gets to go out and wander around with the First Doctor and the Fifth Doctor. Right. And this is part of the problem of having so many characters that you can't give them all stuff to do, and so Turlough ends up in the TARDIS. Susan, fortunately, has more to do, especially at the beginning of the story, where she has been transported to the Death Zone, but she doesn't realize she's on Gallifrey because she's in these corridors that look like Skaro, and there's a Dalek chasing her and the First Doctor, and at first they think they're on Skaro. But then later on, she gets stuck with Turlough in the TARDIS for a lot of the adventure. Right.
Which is unfortunate because, again, Carol Ann Ford is fun. The Fifth Doctor and Turlough and Tegan start at a place called the Eye of Orion,
which we've heard about so many times. It's nice to finally see it.
Yeah, and it's the most tranquil place in the universe, which sounds like a nice place to go. It looks a lot like rural United Kingdom somewhere, Wales or Scotland or something.
But it has all these positive ions, so that's why it's better.
Yes, positive ions make you feel good. And then we start to see each of the Doctors who will appear in this episode chased by mysterious floating flat planes. It looks a little like the thing in the first Superman movie where the bad guys from Krypton get stuck in it. That's their prison.
The Phantom Zone.
Phantom Zone, right. It looks a little like that.
It also looks like a black triangle or black trapezoid.
Yeah. And this is after the Superman movie.
It is.
So it's maybe inspired by that. And
when it grabs you, you have your face appears on it really big and screaming, just like the Phantom Zone.
Yeah, that's why it reminded me of it. And as each Doctor is captured by it, and one companion, Sarah Jane, they end up the Doctor when the Doctors are captured. The Fifth Doctor feels like part of him being just torn away. He's losing parts of himself, and he's collapsing and has to be carried to the TARDIS. So whoever this mysterious figure in black, it'll turn out to be Barusa, they're ripping the Doctor to pieces, essentially, and placing them in the Death Zone. It's kind of, we don't really get an explanation of why that is like that. It's just we have to accept it and move on. Yeah,
he's even like fading out of existence in and out of existence as a result of this. And then once he meets the First Doctor, he's back to normal.
Right. We do get a lot of our, some of our favorite quotes, my favorite quotes from Classic Who in this one, because when the second Doctor shows up at Unit, there's a new guy in charge. And he says, oh, you've had this place redecorated. I don't like it.
Yeah.
And then he says something about to the Brigadier about his replacement. Yeah, I was disappointed in my replacement too.
Yeah, mine was rather unpromising as well.
which is a nice dig at both the third Doctor and this new colonel in charge of things.
In this story, Patrick Troughton's Doctor is more snipey than he was back when he was the main Doctor. And I noticed it's like he's getting in more digs than he normally does, but it's because of the tradition of inter-Doctor sniping.
Yeah.
So if this was a solo Patrick Troughton story, he wouldn't be this negative. Right.
Then the third Doctor, of course, gets to drive Bessie because his, that's his famous conveyance. He lives to drive around and gets captured in Bessie, and Bessie ends up on Gallifrey and breaking down there. Hopefully he got it back later. And you mentioned the fourth Doctor. So he's punting, and punting, if for those who don't know, is a type of boating where you push the boat along using a long pole that you dig into the bottom of the stream, and you push yourself along,
like with gondolas in Venice.
Picture that. And so, and he and Romana are talking about punting and physics and whatnot. It was a good scene in Shada, actually. I mean, I like the image of them in Oxford. Is it Oxford or Cambridge?
No, it's Oxford. And I like that they mention, famous thinkers who have been at Oxford. They talked about Newton, for example, but they also mentioned Owen Chadwick. And it's like, oh, wow, nice to get a name check for Owen Chadwick. He was a 20th century theologian and historian of the history of Christianity. And it was nice getting him name checked on this, especially because he was still alive at the time and he was still teaching at Oxford. And so they were naming a living professor.
That's really cool. And then something goes wrong with the fourth Doctor's abduction. And so they take Sarah Jane instead, or was Sarah Jane planned? She was planned.
She was planned to be the fourth Doctor's companion, but when Tom Baker didn't show, they had reassigned her to the third Doctor.
Okay. If only she'd listened to K9. K9 knew something was wrong, and she just ignored him. Just don't ignore K9. He knows what's up. And then we get the first appearance of the High Council of the Time Lords and Lord President Barusa welcoming Anthony Ainley's master in, asking him to come rescue the Doctor. Which, when you're watching this without knowing what's all going on, you're thinking, why would you ask the master to rescue the Doctor? That just seems silly. But when you know Barusa's plan, introducing the master into the mix really does make things, crazy the way he wants it, chaotic and wild. And that's really interesting.
He's initially, though, I had a bit of a different take because they make a point that Barusa did not want to involve the master. In fact, that's the first thing he says is, I don't want to involve this person. And the other members of the council say yes, but in emergency circumstances, if the council is unanimous, which we are, we can veto you. And so they've injected the master over Barusa's objections. And so if you know Barusa's plan, that he's the one manipulating stuff in the death zone, then I could see why he wouldn't want the master involved. After all, the master might get there first and get immortality ahead of him.
Right. The master does play an interesting role throughout this. He's tricky and diabolical, but in the end, he actually is one of the reasons why Barusa's plan doesn't succeed, because he's introduced into this.
Also, there's a nice bit early on where they're negotiating with him, and they tell him, number one, we'll give you a pardon. And he's like, what makes you think I want your forgiveness? And they say, and we'll give you a complete new cycle of regenerations. And that interests him. And that's the introduction into Doctor Who, now that they established the ridiculous regeneration limit rule. Now they establish they can break it, which they end up paying off at the end of the 11th Doctor's time, when the Time Lords do give the 11th Doctor a whole new cycle of regenerations, which then gets retconned further in the 13th Doctor's time by removing the regeneration limit altogether. So we don't need to worry about it anymore, and we don't need to have weird quibbles about Doctor numberings.
I will note that the fifth Doctor does say he's the fourth regeneration of himself.
So based on his knowledge, he doesn't remember the pre-Hartnell Doctors.
Although in the brain of Morbius,
I know it's an inconsistency.
yeah, it's inconsistent. So
my theory is different incarnations of the Doctor have different degrees of access to their memory. And in some cases, like when the in the brain of Morbius, when Morbius is trying to force the fourth Doctor all the way back to his beginning, I forget if it's in the TV show or in the novelization, but he's got a line about like, no, even I'm not allowed to remember that, or something along those lines. That under extreme stress, knowledge of these previous incarnations starts to come out, but there's some kind of barrier there. And then I think the seventh Doctor, who displays knowledge that he is much more than an ordinary Time Lord, I think he has, based on clues in different episodes, he acts like he's got much more knowledge of his history than other incarnations do.
Right. I mean, even in this story, different Doctors have more knowledge of things than the others. Like they, if they all had the same memories, you wouldn't need all 4 or 5 of them there in the same way. So the Dark Tower that's at the center of the Death Zone is the tomb of Rassilon. Rassilon is the sort of the George Washington of Time Lords. Yeah,
he's considered the greatest of the Time Lords, although they paired him with Omega, and also they've paired him in the Cartmel Master Plan. He was paired with another figure that was going to turn out to be a version of the Doctor known as the Other. So there were going to be these 3. There were Rassilon, Omega, and the Other were the 3 founders of Time Lord Society. And in the current canonicity, it's Rassilon, Omega, and Tecteun, who kind of takes the role of the Other and is connected with the Doctor, but is not the same person as the Doctor. But basically, Omega and Rassilon were like stellar engineers who set the basis of Time Lord Society by creating the black hole, the Eye of Harmony, that drives their time travel technology. And Omega vanished into the parallel universe and was believed to have been destroyed, whereas Rassilon stayed in our universe and got all the glory. And then Tecteun handles the other side of Time Lord technology, which is regeneration. So between Omega and Rassilon getting them the power needed to do time travel, and Tecteun getting them the regeneration ability, that's basically how you got modern Time Lord Society.
Right. And so his tomb is in the middle of the Death Zone, which seems an odd place to place it.
This is a bit of writing stupidity, because we're told that the Death Zone was like this coliseum, this arena, a combat arena that our ancestors used before the time of Rassilon, and then Rassilon put a stop to it, being the allegedly enlightened leader that he was. Well, and there's also a nice comment where the Brigadier turns to the second Doctor and says, so I gather he's a good un. And the second Doctor says, well, that's the official story, but there are also a lot of rumors he was just the opposite. And I like that ambiguity about Rassilon's character. But so the Death Zone was used before Rassilon, and Rassilon put a stop to it. So then why did he put his tomb in the middle of it? And why do they refer to all the combat that goes on in it as the game of Rassilon, if Rassilon was opposed to it?
That was the weird inconsistency, because he put a stop to it, but we're calling it the game of Rassilon. That doesn't make sense. Yeah. And the tomb itself is a kind of puzzle box that you have to, navigate through to get to. It's classic Dungeons and Dragons, sort of avoid the traps and the monsters. Yeah. It just seems kind of, I don't know, it just seems kind of silly to make, like, if that's a tomb, but it's a story. So we have the tomb. We mentioned the time scoop. The third Doctor straight up doesn't believe the Master's there to help. He sees the Master. He's like, nope, I'm going the other way. Forget you.
And he takes the Master's, the Time Lord Council gave the Master their seal so that he could prove he's really on a mission from them. And the doctor, the third doctor, when he gives him the seal of the High Council, says, "Oh, forged." And it's like, no. Oh, well, stolen then. Anyway, I'll give it back to them when I see them next. And he keeps it so he can't use it to show any of the other doctors.
Right. And so that when he ends up, running into the fifth doctor, the master runs into the fifth doctor, he doesn't have the seal. He's trying to prove his bona fides to him and ends up getting knocked out, by, was it the Cybermen, right?
Yeah.
And the fifth doctor takes his transmat remote from him and transmats to the council chambers.
And he's like,
there.
"Oh, he was telling the truth. How about that?"
Meanwhile, the master's out in the middle of the death zone, unconscious.
Oh, by the way, there was something else I wanted to mention about the scene where they're negotiating with the master. Mm-hmm. The council is concerned that the doctor is going to suffer some horrible fate because he's been divided up in this way and he may die in the death zone and stuff like that. And so the master says, "A universe without the doctor scarcely bears contemplating." And that shows the positive side of the master, that he really does actually appreciate the doctor. He doesn't want him to die, or at least not by anyone else's hands. And just like in it all the way back with Roger Delgado's master in that season that he was in every episode of, he was offering to rule the universe with the doctor and offering the doctor huge power that the doctor could use for good if he wanted. So the master's not all bad, and here he's like, "Yeah, okay, I don't want the universe to not have the doctor in it. I'll go help him."
I think he's conflicted, and part of him likes having the doctor to go, iron sharpens iron sort of thing. But he also, I think there's also some true affection still left in him somewhere.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And reciprocally on the doctor's point, when the master meets the third doctor, Sarah Jane's right there and she says, "Who is that?" And it takes a moment for the doctor to recognize the master, because he's not Roger Delgado anymore. He's Anthony Ainley. But he recognizes him and he says, "He's my best enemy."
Right. And that's the thing, is Sarah Jane never saw the master. That was, we didn't even get to Decayed Master until after she left.
Yeah, she was in the gap. Joe Grant saw the Roger Delgado master, and we get the Decayed Master after Sarah Jane's time, when the doctor returns to Gallifrey.
Yeah, with Leela, but I don't even...
No. The first time we see the Decayed Master, he's played by Peter What's-His-Name, and it's when the doctor has just been summoned back to Gallifrey, and he doesn't know what fate awaits him, so he leaves Sarah Jane on Earth.
Right, and before Leela, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the third doctor and Sarah Jane run into yet another creature. This one's a new one, right? The Rastin warrior robot?
Yes, this is new. Originally, it was going to be a return of the Quarks, who were from the second Doctor's time.
Right.
But they didn't do that for some reason, so they came up with this other thing.
Oh my, it's supposed to be the deadliest warrior robot in the universe. And I just had to laugh at it. It was kind of ridiculous.
It's a guy in a silk body stocking.
And he's kind of jumping around like Moment Chance. It was, I mean, you have to be Gen X probably. I don't even know what Moment Chance is, but he's just kind of jumping around and like zapping out of existence and zapping in somewhere else. And it just seemed kind of ridiculous. I hate to say it. It did not seem all that scary or formidable.
Yeah, the most X whatever is another writing trope that I get annoyed by. The most, it's like the most fill in the blank thing ever. I get it. Right. It's like, come on.
Just say it's a deadly robot.
It's a deadly robot. It doesn't have to be the most deadly robot ever devised.
Right. And if it is, it's pretty poorly designed, because it hunts by movement. Like,
yeah,
not sight, not sound, not radar. Sure. But it does manage to take out all a bunch of the Cybermen. So that's
wow!
Good.
It decapitates 2 Cybermen, and they, I mean, just totally cuts their heads off. And okay, they play it as if the Cybermen are robots in this rather than cyborgs, but he's taking people's heads off here. I mean, biological people's heads. And they even seemingly allude to that, because in one of as the Cybermen are being attacked by the robot, you can see one of them throwing up. And they might, it goes by really fast, but one of them's throwing up. And you could suppose, well, maybe they're really robots and that's oil or something coming out of it. But no, if you know the lore, these are cyborgs. They're living biological organisms that have mechanical upgrades, and he's tearing them apart physically.
I have to say, for the first time in Classic Who, they're understandable. Their dialogue, they finally got the voice down right so that you can understand what they're saying easily. Well, they often overdo the cyber voice.
They often overdo it. Although the first appearance, the cyber voice, I think, is effectively creepy and understandable in the 10th planet.
That's true. So, meanwhile, Barusa, back in the Time Council chambers, has framed the Castellan for being this figure in black who's abducted the Doctor. I suppose he needed to frame somebody, Barusa did, in order to keep them off the scent until he got the completion of his goal.
Because this is when the 5th Doctor shows up, he's like, whoever's behind this is a Time Lord. And a fairly high-ranking one, too, he points out, in order to be able to control the Death Zone technology and the time scoop and stuff. It's got to be a high-ranking Time Lord. So he's just pointed the finger at the High Council. And so that's why Barusa has to frame the Castellan. So,
and meanwhile, back at the Dark Tower, the different Doctors, the 3 different Doctors, are approaching the tower's entrances. There's 3 different entrances. There's an underground one, a ground level one, and one high up on the tower. In the underground, the 2nd Doctor and the Brigadier are being chased by a Yeti through tunnels till they find the entrance. On the ground level, it's the 1st Doctor, and who's with the 1st Doctor at this point?
Tegan.
Tegan is, that's right. And they kind of just walk in and they encounter a trapped a checkerboard thing, which I get to in a second. And then above ground, it's the 3rd Doctor and Sarah Jane, and they have to what's that called? Use a guideline or whatever. I can't remember the name of it. The thing where you slide on a wire through the trees. They're doing that across to the tower. And poor Sarah Jane apparently is really afraid of heights.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth Sladen really lays it on Nick about her fears of falling.
There is unfortunately and I forget the name of I know the name. I know the thing you're talking about. I'm forgetting its name too. But there's an unfortunate mismatch between the close-ups of the 3rd Doctor and Sarah Jane climbing aboard, the ramparts of the top of the tower, and the broad shot we get of their rope that they've been sliding along. Because if you look at the rope in the broad shot, it is not taut. It is not a straight line between the mountain and the top of the tower. It's a big curve. It's dipping down. And if you try to slide across that, when the rope is not taut, you're going to slide down to the bottom of the curve and hang there.
Stay there. I thought they were going to hand over hand across, but they didn't. I remember now, zip line. They was basically zip lining across. Yeah, it has to be taut. That is funny.
There's also another bit with Sarah Jane where this is early on, where just to create some drama, she falls down a hill and as she's rolling down the hill screaming, and then the 3rd Doctor uses another rope that he's got on Bessie to haul her back up, but it just looks so, her roll down this hill looks so fake and ridiculous with the fake scream. It's just laughable.
Well, and it wasn't that steep of a hill. I mean, you could have stood up and walked back up the hill. It's just, it was kind of silly. So I would mention the 1st Doctor and Tegan. They go in and they encounter this checkerboard pattern, which is clearly a trap. And as they're trying to figure out their way across it, that's when the Master shows up. The Master has been captured by the Cybermen, but in his usual way, he's offered to betray everyone else in order to help them. And you're not quite sure what he's up to, because he's really not. He actually betrays the Cybermen here, because he knows the way to get across. For whatever reason, he knows the pattern you need to get to take, and lures them across into this space, all but the Cyber leader. And they all get zapped by the trap.
And then he gets one of the cyber guns and shoots the cyber leader with it.
Right.
So he completely betrays the Cybermen. He's doing his mission for the High Council.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see.
However, the whole chessboard trap is really lamely done because we're given multiple inconsistent explanations of how it works.
Yeah.
The first Doctor, by the way, when he meets the Master, he doesn't recognize him, and the Master says, actually, we went to the Academy together, which is another nice confirmation. I think we actually had that fact mentioned in the third Doctor's time.
Yeah.
But it's a nice refresher. But the fifth Doctor starts throwing coins on the chessboard to figure out how it works. And he concludes that nothing happens until you get to the fifth row, and then everything on the board becomes a target for laser beams. And then when Anthony Ainley comes, he hopscotches across I think the first time he just walks across the chessboard.
Yep.
And then he hopscotches back along the edge of it. And he says the pattern changes every time you cross. So he says there's a new pattern every time. And then he leads the Cybermen onto it, and they all die. And he crosses in front of the first Doctor and Tegan a couple of times and says, see, as easy as pi. And then he walks off. And the Doctor concludes the number pi, which is, 3.14159265 or whatever. And instead of stepping in accordance with those numbers somehow, Richard Herndl just walks across. And it's like, you didn't use a pattern at all. You just walked across this thing. What you did had nothing to do with the number pi.
Right.
And then he's turning around and telling Tegan, now you do it. And fortunately, and Tegan looks like you're crazy, but fortunately they cut away so that we don't have to see what Tegan does to get across, because it was just embarrassing. They're talking about stuff that they are not visualizing for us.
Yeah, that's weird that they didn't bother to even just to do something. But they're like, well, we're moving on. Next scene. We got 90 minutes to fill. We're moving on to the next shot. So as the third Doctor and Sarah Jane are moving through the tower, this is when they encounter the weird illusions of Mike Yates and Joe Grant, who act strangely out of character and then scream at the top of their lungs as he leaves them and they disappear. And then the same thing happens with the second Doctor and Jamie and Zoe, which nice to see them. Zoe and Jamie are 10 years older at this point, and a little more than that, actually, I think, than the last time we saw them, 10 or 15.
And Wendy Padbury was pregnant, which is why they designed that weird blue bubble wrap dress for her to hide the bump.
I see. Yeah. But looking good. I'm glad to see them both. And we'll see Jamie again in the two Doctors story. But nice to see them. And then everyone gets to the actual tomb of Rassilon. They all kind of show up there together, and there's a little obelisk in there with writing on it that doesn't look like the Gallifreyan we know, but it's Old High Gallifreyan, which looks basically like Greek letters or mathematical symbols or something.
Yeah, it's kind of a combination.
Yeah. They have to.
Speaking of math, the first Doctor also refers to pi as a mathematical formula, which just shows you the level of mathematical knowledge the writers have.
Right. It is not a formula. It is
it's a number. Constant. Yeah.
A number. Yeah. So they have to together translate the inscription on Rassilon's tomb. There is a nice moment where the third Doctor and the Brigadier reunite for the first time in this, in this one. It's nice to see that they're happy to see each other. And
there's a great bit where at the beginning where the second Doctor has shown up at unit, there's like a passing of the torch ceremony or something where Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart is turning the keys over to Colonel whoever. And the second Doctor shows up and says, "Oh, I read about your speech in the Times." And the Colonel is like, "That's impossible. This is strictly under wraps." And he said, "Tomorrow's Times."
Yeah, you're right. The report is still out here. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny that the third Doctor would be like, "Oh, Brigadier Leather Stewart, it's so great to see you," because he would be around the Brigadier at this point, right? I mean, but yeah, it's fine.
This version of him could be from after he started traveling in the TARDIS again, and maybe he hadn't seen him. Yeah, we can rationalize that.
Yeah, I like to do the fourth wall break and just make it Pertwee and Courtney seeing each other. So the Master shows up and he tries to betray the Doctors and take the immortality ring for himself, but it's the Brigadier who gets the drop on him, which is nice to see. The Brig is competent as usual, although we don't actually get 5 rounds rapid in this one, which is kind of disappointing. Now, Barusa, we get his plan revealed. The Fifth Doctor figures out. I like the bit where he figures out how to get into the secret room off of the council chamber. There's Rassilon's harp, and I didn't know he was musical. And then he says he plucks a string. Here's something like a combination moving or something like that. Something in the wall,
something shifting,
which gives him the clue that it's a key to open up a door. And what's the key? So what is the key? What do I have to play? And then notices there's a painting on the wall of Rassilon playing this harp, and the sheet music is visible. So he plays the music. The Doctor apparently knows how to play the harp, and he plays the music, and that opens the door, which is kind of I like that little bit of secret, mysterious thing.
It's very Scooby-Doo.
Yes, right, exactly. This is where we get the reveal of Barusa as the bad guy, and he wants to be president eternal and rule forever. I hate when rulers want to just keep going on and on despite the rules. Just kidding. And the third Doctor, meanwhile, has to. They're trying to get the TARDIS released. The TARDIS is about to be blown up by the Cybermen. That was actually one thing that's been surrounded by these explosives. And Turlough and Susan are inside, and they're certain they're about to die. And then the third Doctor reverses the polarity of the neutron flow, which of course, and that lets the TARDIS dematerialize and reappear inside the tomb chamber.
Yeah, this whole subplot is a little wonky. Susan and Turlough are in the TARDIS and they hear this hammering noise. And so they look on the monitor to see what's going on outside, and they see some Cybermen playing with a rope. And there's no hammering going on. But eventually the Cybermen bring this big kind of blob, up to the TARDIS, which they reason must be explosives. And I don't know why they're so afraid, because the TARDIS is nigh on to invulnerable, and Susan in particular knows that. So I don't know why they're actually afraid of this. In fact, why are the Cybermen, are they trying to blow it up? Because they've already said we're going to need one of the Doctors to pilot the TARDIS. So they're apparently planning on acquiring the TARDIS. Maybe they want to just blow open the doors, but even that is iffy. And then later they talk about, as the Cybermen are getting ready to blow open the doors, I guess, Susan says, well, at least that hammering noise has stopped. It's like, you never showed us Cybermen hammering anything.
Right. So Barusa shows up. He's got the ring from the corpse, and the floating image, the floating head, the Wizard of Oz like floating head of Rassilon appears and asks, what is it you want? I want immortality. And so he makes him, okay, then you get to be immortal, just like sort of the genie granting the wish exactly as you asked for it. And so you're immortalized on the side of the sarcophagus.
This is a monkey's paw situation. Yeah.
Right. And then Rassilon turns to the Doctor and asks, what would you like? And the Doctor wisely chooses not to take immortality. And he tells him, you have chosen wisely, Doctor. And it made me think of Raiders, Indiana Jones Part 3. Mm-hmm. He chose poorly. Yeah. The understatement.
I like the sequence where Rassilon gets immortalized, because there's like 4 on the face of of Rassilon's sarcophagus that we see, or the bier that it's sitting on, or whatever it is. There's like 4 panels, and 3 of them have these bas relief of guys, busts of men in them in Time Lord regalia, and one of them's blank. And Rassilon says there have been predecessors who've come here before you, and so that's who the other 3 guys are. Mm-hmm. They're other people who got here before Barusa and have been immortalized. And so when he immortalizes Barusa, he appears as a bas relief on that 4th panel, and as that's happening, the faces of the bas reliefs, including Barusa's, partially animate. So you can see their eyes moving back and forth in anxiety. And you get the sense this is not a fun, happy immortality here. This is like living hell.
Wow. Yeah, that was suitably creepy. It is Chekhov's blank panel, by the way. As soon as I saw that odd blank panel, you're like, something's going to happen to that one.
Yeah.
So the Fifth Doctor, meanwhile, I liked the TARDISes. All the Doctors go into the TARDISes with companions, into the TARDIS, and it's like, how are they all why are they all going into one TARDIS and saying goodbye? And then we see it's each individual Doctor's TARDIS, sort of parting from the one and going off, which is kind of an interesting effect. And so they're all sort of coexisting in one time and place at a time.
They're overlapping.
Yeah. Then and then, as you mentioned, the Fifth Doctor gets shanghaied to be the Time Lord President again, because the Fourth Doctor was also the Time Lord President, and runs off at the end to as he has before. Mm-hmm. And then presumably the next season will begin soon. So any other notes on this one?
There's a moment where the First Doctor, I think he's arguably out of character. So this is the 80s. Feminism is a big thing. And the First Doctor is manifestly from the early 60s. And so just like in Twice Upon a Time, there's a bit of portraying the First Doctor as if he's sexist, because he tells Tegan to make herself useful, by which he means get some food. And Janet Fielding, who plays Tegan, as an actress, refused to do that. And so they rewrote the scene so that Tegan objects to the First Doctor telling her to do that. And the Fifth Doctor says Turlough will help. And it's actually Turlough who gets the food. And when you see the food, it's like space food. They have, for example, they're drinking green Kool-Aid and blue Kool-Aid, and they have little cakes and stuff. So this is like outer space tea time. But I don't think that the First Doctor was really that. I don't remember the First Doctor, treating women that way. I mean, he didn't treat them. I'm not saying there was no effect from the time that the gender attitudes of the early 1960s did happen on the show, but I don't recall him just directing women to get food in that way. I mean, maybe he did. Maybe I'm not remembering some episode, but it seemed a little out of character for me. I did like how the Fifth Doctor tried to cover for the First Doctor with Tegan and say, just humor him. I used to be very tetchy.
Right. I think with Susan, he at times in the Hartnell period would ask her to go fetch him a thing, please, dear.
Yeah.
But that's a grandfather asking his granddaughter to help him.
Right. That's not the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, I liked with the Second Doctor, as he's recounting memories with the Brigadier, he mentions, we fought the Yetis and the Cybermen and the terrible Zoden. And the Brigadier is like, the who? And the terrible Zoden. Yes, she you weren't in on her. She was in the future. And
right.
and then he makes his comment about something being completely hairy and hopping like a kangaroo. and so the terrible Zoden became, as a result of this line, the terrible Zoden became an in-joke as this fearsome, terrible villain that we have never seen. So and she gets mentioned in other episodes too. Like there's an episode in the Sixth Doctor where the Sixth Doctor mentions the terrible Zodin. And so I just can't help wondering who she was. What's the terrible Zodin like? What makes her so terrible? So I liked that. They had some, junk of Rassilon stuff in this. We have the tower and the game and the coronet of Rassilon that lets you mind control people, and the ring of Rassilon that gives you immortality, and the black scrolls of Rassilon, which is what Barusa uses to frame the Castellan. He sends a guard to search the Castellan's quarters, and he comes back with this wooden chest that has the black scrolls of Rassilon in it. And you open it up, and there are these scrolls in there, and they're black. And they're apparently forbidden knowledge from the Death Zone or something like that. And they immediately burst into flame, which makes them not the best information storage medium. You generally don't want your scrolls to spontaneously catch fire. So we don't get too much on them, but they're a cool concept. Also, the head of the guards that he sends to search the Castellan's quarters, that was going to be Colin Baker as Maxil.
Oh.
They wanted Colin Baker to come back and reprise his role, but he wasn't available. Otherwise, that would have been Colin Baker again.
We would have had 6 doctors. A future one. That's funny. Excellent. So that is the 5 doctors. So before we wrap things up, I did mention we have some listener feedback, so let me get to that now. This is an email from Stephen. And Stephen writes, after finally getting to watch the newest Doctor Who episodes earlier this year, and eagerly awaiting the new ones with the 14th and 15th, I just caught up on the Flux episodes. I really agree with almost all of your likes and dislikes from it, I think. It was a really neat season of television, even if it left a few things to be desired. I hope we eventually get closure on more aspects of the events of the Flux, but do retain some mysteries too. I wanted to email in not only for that, but because I'm confused by Jimmy's comments about representation, which he brings up regarding Diane. He said that it's just to fulfill a checklist, which does happen and is bad. People shouldn't be just put in things as tokens for producers. And that he's never been traumatized by not having any Southern red-bearded Catholic mystery-solving apologists with dyslexia with whom to identify, and you other 2 guys just laughed along with him. I don't have much experience with this other than appreciating well-done portrayals of autism, but I've heard from a bunch of people about appreciating it when people like them are in things, especially with a lot of American and UK TV not having a great deal of females or people of color as good leads. White men like us did have a monopoly on media and other things like this for a while, though I know there's more to it than that. My friend Katie is a Catholic Twitch streamer and has talked about how happy her daughter Mary is to have dolls with incompletely formed limbs like her. And I remember how happy Jimmy was with the portrayal of the dyslexic boy Elliot in The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood. There are obviously bad ways to do that, and I agree with you that characters should be complex and not just there for their one characteristic. I hope I'm not being preachy and vulnerable about this. Please forgive me, I was concerned by your tone in talking about representation because it seems mean. I mean well, and I believe you do too. Thank you for making good podcasts about both fun reviews of shows and of interesting topics and mysteries, and with a great Christian perspective. That's a character trait I wish we saw more on Doctor Who and Star Trek. I don't always agree with you guys about viewpoints, but I like hearing what you have to say. So that was Stephen.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. I'm glad you enjoyed the podcasts. In terms of the issue of representation, I don't know that we're that far apart because you say you recognize it can be done badly, but it also can play a positive role. And I agree. I think it can be done badly, but it also can play a positive role. My issue isn't with having characters that represent particular demographic groups on screen. I'm all fine with that. My concerns are about, there's sort of 2. One of them is representation that is historically inaccurate. Like, for example, I was reading a review or an article about a film recently that was set in like the 1600s in Denmark. And the reporters were asking, why aren't there any black people in this? It's like, well, because it's the 1600s in Denmark. You know, you didn't have that kind of travel, you know, that would result in this period in Danish history, or maybe it was Norway, I forget, but it was a period where, you know, people didn't travel in the same way, and you didn't have people, you know, crossing or being planted on other sides of international borders in that way. So it just didn't fit the historical period. The other is, besides period inappropriate representation, you know, like, you know, if you're watching a show about medieval China, you don't expect to see a Native American, you know, a Cherokee in it, because there weren't any Cherokees in medieval China, and it would be ridiculous to shove one in just to have Cherokee representation in a Chinese film. The other is representation density, where every single character, or at least an anomalously high portion of characters, fits some demographic category in order to let the producers tick a box. And this is the one that happens constantly in American media right now. There has been an overreaction to historic demographic presences in media that it's like gone to the other extreme. People have commented on how, whereas it used to be uncommon to have female leads in action movies, yeah, as opposed to romances, you know, which have always had female leads. Now it's like all the action movies have female leads, and it's kind of gone to the other extreme. Another one is gay people. There were like no gay people in a lot of historical media, but now they're in everything in a way that's way out of proportion to their representation in the population. And so, and in Chris Chibnall's time, Chris Chibnall unfortunately had a tendency to focus on characters who fit demographic boxes that look very calculated. And so you've got, just look at the companions in the Fifth Doctor's time. You've got, not only is the Doctor herself female for the first time, which, you know, I don't have a problem with in principle. I didn't like this actress's portrayal of the Doctor, but look at the companions. Graham, okay, he's a senior citizen, he's an interracial couple, and he's a cancer survivor. 3 tick boxes right there. Ryan is a young black man and has dyspraxia. 2 tick boxes right there. Yaz is from the Indian subcontinent, so she's a minority in that sense, and she's a woman, and she has emotional problems, and she ends up being gay. 4 tick boxes. Dan, on the other hand, is the most normal. You know, unless you want to say he's working class, he seems to be the most normal, which is why he's one of the most enjoyable companions. But then his love interest, Diane, it has a physical disability. So when you just look at the companions that Chris Chibnall chose, they almost all look like they're doing some kind of representation as opposed to just being interesting characters. And so it's not, I don't have a problem in principle with any one of these characters, but when you get them all together, it feels like the show is doing some kind of demographic preaching at you. And so my problem isn't with representation. I would take any of these characters fine, but when you put them all together, when you cram so much demographic diversity into a small space, it feels unrealistic, and I would say that's representation done badly.
Yeah, I would agree. And he mentions how the Father Corey and I laughed along with your, I just thought it was a funny image, is like seeing a red bearded Southern Catholic apologist who isn't you. Like, I mean, it was such a specific example. It was a funny,
and that's why I used it, because we can all get super specific about the representation we're demanding. Is it enough to have a white guy? Well, no, he needs to have a red beard, and he needs to be a Southerner, and he needs to be an apologist, and he needs to solve mysteries. And if I don't see exactly that, I'm not being represented. Well,
yeah.
It's
not about being mean. It is about just pointing out tendencies that we see in Hollywood and the UK media as well to do this. And just, I don't think there's anything wrong with pointing it out.
Yeah. But in terms of showing a diversity of characters and having dolls that, represent the physicality of different groups of children, I think that's great. It's just, I don't want it. I don't want an artificial or inappropriate, historically inappropriate form of representation shoved down my throat.
Right. And it would be boring to have every show be all a bunch of middle class white guys too. I mean, it's you want a diversity of characters, but as I think you said it right, Jimmy, I'm not going to repeat it, but thank you, Stephen, for your email, and I hope that that helps. So we'd like to finish up now by taking a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Ann H., Randy W., Mary K., Brian D., and Jack W. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Zyman Yannick, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. What did you think of The Five Doctors? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com, the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord, or watch the show in video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia and leave a comment there. We'll be back next time when we may be discussing, depending on when the BBC decides to release the 14th Doctor specials, we may be discussing that, which would be awesome. Or we'll be discussing the 12th Doctor story, Hellbent. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thanks, Tom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, Brigadier, have I ever led you astray? This will be the exception.